At the outset, a privileged few had full rights, while many others were forced to find their own pathways to equality. Then a wave of women stood their ground. Faced with many dead ends, they drove relentlessly along narrow roads and around uncharted bends, until at long last one group's great accomplishment led them straight away to better but still uneven and unequal days. A second wave made progress, but faced many obstacles and came up short of its goal. It's been a man's world for a long time, but maybe someday we'll be able to say that equally so, it's a woman's world. A show which looks at any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Featuring Ali Naithani. Here's Ali.
Welcome to the show, and I'd like to welcome a very special person, Candy Pettiford. Thank you for being here.
Well, yes, I'm glad to be here. And you said welcome, so it is not like I'm some stranger. You know,
Never.
Welcome, stranger. Never a stranger here.
Never a stranger
No,
you are.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful to be co-hosting with you
Well,
again.
I love that. You know what? I'm just kind of passing through now.
Yes,
Mind you, I'm
I
passing
know,
through.
and I'm glad we got you while
Yeah,
you're passing
but as
through.
my granddaughter says, can
Yeah.
we get back to cooking
Yeah,
again?
you want more cooking?
Want more cooking.
Okay,
All
okay,
right.
viewers. I'm going to do some cooking. We'll
Yeah,
get
good,
cooking on
good.
the agenda real
All
soon.
right, good.
All right. Well, today's show, we are going to be talking about genocide, and I'd like to start by introducing our guest.
Let's do that.
Okay. Dr. Ellen Kennedy is with us today. She is the founder and the executive director of World Without Genocide. We also have with us Rachel Beecroft. Rachel is the program and operations coordinator for World Without Genocide. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, Ellen, would you explain to us World Without Genocide?
Yes,
I want to
sure.
know the understanding of that.
Yeah.
Sure. World Without Genocide is a human rights organization, Candy. We are located at William Mitchell College of Law in St. Paul. And we have a twofold mission, essentially. The first is to educate people about genocides and other mass atrocities that have happened both in the past and those that are occurring today in places such as Darfur and Burma and Congo. And the purpose of that education is to engage people in advocacy in ways that at the local, state, national, and international levels, we can all make a difference. We have 4 words that we think are very important, and those words are protect, prevent, prosecute, and remember. Protect innocent people wherever they might be. Help to prevent genocide and mass atrocities. Prosecute those people who are perpetrators of these kinds of violence. And remember people and communities whose lives have been destroyed by genocide. So this is our mission.
Well, I guess I'd like to know how you got into that. Is it a passion as you were a child or teenager or a young woman yourself? Did you know someone who this genocide happened? Or how did you get into this?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I'm Jewish, and I was born after World War II. And of course, like almost every other Jew living in the United States today, I had distant family who perished during the Holocaust. So I always had that in my conscience and in my unconscious as well. So as I grew up, that resonated with me. These stories of terrible things that happened to people, based only on who they were. In 2005, I went to Rwanda, and I spent 2 weeks traveling around Rwanda with a young woman, a young Rwandan woman, who is an orphan survivor of that genocide. Her mother and father, grandparents, sister, and 9-year-old and 2-year-old brothers all were killed
My goodness.
in 1994 during that tragedy. And that really struck at my heart.
Sure.
So I came to this because the enormity of what was happening, not only in the past, but as I mentioned, in the present, was simply something I felt I could not walk away from.
Wow.
And Rachel, what about you? What drew you to this work?
I've always been very aware of what's going on around me and the people that are around me. And I was studying political science in college, and one day we talked about genocide, and I thought, well, what is this genocide? And then I started taking other classes on genocide. And there was one semester that really was kind of the turning point in where I wanted to go with my life. And I was doing a lot of reading, a lot of memoirs, a lot of textbooks about genocide, about Rwanda, the Holocaust. And I started having nightmares that I would think I was in a
Really?
concentration camp, and I would wake up almost in tears. Or I would have these dreams that I was running away from someone with a machete chasing me.
My
And then
goodness.
one day I started trying to avoid sleeping and try to avoid dreaming. And then one day I realized that that's my dreams, and that I have the luxury to be able to wake up from that, and that there are millions of people that that's their life, and that's what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so that kind of made me think about my position in the world and how I was, by the accident of my birth, I was lucky enough to be born into a middle-class American family where I can go to college and I can have food on the table and a house over my, like a roof over my head, and just made me realize that if I was born in Africa or Rwanda or during the Holocaust, that I would hope that someone else somewhere who was in a position more fortunate than myself would be working to fight against those injustices.
Wow, powerful stories to
Powerful
get to
stories.
the work you're doing.
Oh.
Well, before we get into the trip, both of you went to Guatemala, where you're going to tell us about what is going on there and what the implications of the genocide are there. Before we get into that, just so our viewers really understand, tell us, when we talk about genocide, what does that mean? What are we saying?
The word genocide is one that I think is really important to understand. The word didn't even exist until after the Holocaust. There literally was no such word.
Really?
And it was coined by a Polish Jew who had escaped during the Holocaust, came to America, tried desperately to save his own family, and 46 of his family members perished in the ovens of Auschwitz. So the word genocide came about because of his need to put a word to this crime. And it's a crime not only of killing people, but of killing a people. The Genocide Convention that this brave Polish Jew authored for the United Nations, Raphael Lemkin, defines it as the intent to exterminate, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So this is the definition that we have. It's purposeful, it's designed to target a people with that particular definition.
So that happened in Rwanda.
It's
A
happened
certain
in so many places.
That was targeted, a
Yes.
certain tribe?
Exactly.
Okay.
People with certain ethnic affiliations or political identities, yes.
But I think one of the things I wanted to ask you both is is it that today we are still talking about it? I mean, this is something that I think, to your point, when we think of Auschwitz, when we think of what happened so many years ago, that that just doesn't, that's not happening today, but it is happening today, isn't it?
It is indeed.
And I think that's what's in the sense of education with genocide. That's what we have to bring alive, these stories. So tell us about the work you did in Guatemala and what is going on in Guatemala.
Well, Rachel and I went to Guatemala with a human rights group called Rights Action, and the idea was to explore the historical implications of this conflict. From 1960 to 1996, there was a purposeful effort on the part of the military and paramilitary groups in Guatemala to terrorize the indigenous peoples and their supporters, who largely were the intelligentsia, people on the political left, and so on. And the purpose of this targeting was somewhat complicated. In part, it was because there are a few strong, powerful ruling families in Guatemala. And we would call that a group of oligarchs.
Okay.
And that same word is applied to the ruling, powerful people in a place like Russia, for example. The idea was not to exterminate these indigenous peoples and their supporters, but rather to repress them so that they would not rebel, so that they would not want equality, land of their own, a seat at the political table. The idea was to press them to the point where they could be used more or less as slaves. And that was the legacy of the colonial period in Guatemala. Colonized, of course, by the Spaniards, and they and their descendants are known as Ladinos. And what essentially wound up happening during that period of colonialization was that the indigenous peoples became the laborers on the plantations, building the infrastructure and so on. And it's a story, of course, that we know here in our own
Yes.
country
Oh,
as well.
absolutely. Yes.
And these are the stories that become repeated around the world. So the government and its paramilitary and the oligarchs were essentially to blame. They were culpable in more than 200,000 deaths from 1960 to 1996. The United Nations investigated these horrific atrocities, and they said that 83% of the victims of this violence were Mayans, were the indigenous Mayan people. 16% were Ladino, who were killed in retaliation by insurgency groups and so on. So the violence was perpetrated by those in power, and it was perpetrated against those who had no voice. And it's important for us to think about the different roles that exist in these kinds of conflicts. And maybe you could highlight that.
Typically, in these types of conflicts, there's 4 roles. So there's the role of the perpetrator. So that's someone like Adolf Hitler during the Holocaust. So it's someone who's either planning these large-scale human rights atrocities or actually killing the people, or the Guatemalan government in the case of Guatemala and the Guatemalan army. The second role is that of a victim. So that's the people who either are killed or are forced to flee, an internally displaced person, a refugee. The third role is that of a bystander. So that's someone who knows what's going on and does nothing. So in the case of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, it's the United States. We knew about it and we did nothing. President Clinton once said that if he had heard from any of the senators or representatives, he could have saved maybe a few 100,000 lives. But he didn't hear from them because they didn't hear from us. So in that regard, we were all bystanders to that.
That's right.
Because we knew about it and did nothing.
It did nothing.
And then the last role is that of an upstander.
Okay.
So that's the person who hears about these things and actually does something. They stand up for human rights. They stand up against these brutal regimes.
So you could call them an authority figure. The upstanders, are they an authority at all?
No. Sometimes they are very ordinary people.
Just, okay.
And what we want to share with our viewers today are the stories of some of these people who have, at great risk to themselves, become what we call upstanders. The people who are doing the remarkably heroic and difficult task of standing up for those who are disempowered, those who have no voice. Rachel and I were fortunate to meet with the founders of an organization called FAMDEGUA.
Okay.
FAMDEGUA is an organization of women, and it's headed by the 2 remarkable women, Blanca Rosa de Hernandez and Ora Elena Farfan. This organization was created by these 2 women to try to find out what happened to the disappeareds. Now, in our country, we typically don't refer to people as disappeared.
No.
This is the label that has been given in so many parts of the world, Argentina, Guatemala, Burma, and so on, to people who have simply been vanished from their society, from their community, because of their political stand. Thousands and thousands of Guatemalans, ordinary innocent Guatemalans, disappeared. So for Blanca, her son, who was a firefighter, who was working against these government militias, one day was disappeared. Notice the way that language is framed. It's not that he disappeared, which could be of his own volition.
That's a good
He
distinction.
was disappeared.
Okay.
People came and took him. Blanca has never found her son. Ora Elena's brother was disappeared. She has never found her brother. Today, all these decades later. So what these 2 women did was get together and work to try to search for their loved ones. What they did was they went to communities. They worked with people to try to go to the jails to see if if perhaps their loved ones were locked up. They went to the morgues to see if these bodies had been found. They went to the DA's office to see if anybody had reported these people as missing. Their work eventually went farther from just looking for their own loved ones. What they have been doing now since 1984 is trying to help others find their family members. FAMDAGWA has identified 1,288 people who have been able to be identified by forensic exhumations and DNA analysis in Guatemala. So this is an amazing story. FAMDAGWA has taken this a step further, and these two women, despite the constant harassment, despite death threats to them and to all of those who work with them, are now trying to work to prosecute the people who are responsible for these crimes. And I want to mention a remarkable man here in the United States. He works for the Department of Justice. His name is Eli Rosenbaum. And we had Mr. Rosenbaum at William Mitchell College of Law last spring to talk about his work. He not only has devoted his life to tracking down perpetrators of the Holocaust who reside here in the United States, but to perpetrators of these kinds of atrocities from all over the world who have come in to live in the United States. And he's been personally involved in 5 cases of those who were responsible for these horrific atrocities in Guatemala, and in getting them either jailed here in the U.S. or extradited back to Guatemala, where they have stood trial and are now imprisoned. So I mention this because this becomes a global effort. And what Mr. Rosenbaum said to me was that he became involved directly through the efforts of FAMDAGWA and these two heroic women.
My gosh. So it really, I mean, it starts with anyone, really,
That's right.
right?
Starts with
and
anyone.
look at what they created there. So one of the things I wanted to get to real quickly was we've heard this thing called an enough statement.
Right.
So
Yes.
what does that mean?
Well, an enough moment is a phrase that's coined by an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Enough Project. And its basic premise is that there's something in people who work in this type of in human rights work, there's some moment where they say enough is enough, and I've learned about this, and enough, I'm not going to stand by and watch these things happen. And so that's what a personal motivator in standing up and making a change.
Okay, and so really by being a person who does that, you're putting your heels down. You're saying just what the word is, enough.
No more, enough.
So what we have with us next is we have some video clips where we're able to see from 6 people and their moment and when they took the stand and said enough. Do I have that right? Is that what we're going to see? Okay.
Good.
And these 6 people are quite remarkable. They're all young women, and they were part of a summer institute that perhaps Rachel can introduce.
Great.
So we host an annual summer institute for high school students, and this was kind of my brainchild 2.5 years ago when I heard Ellen speak about mobilizing from the ground up, and I thought the best way to mobilize from the ground up is to get young people involved because they are our future, tomorrow's future,
Excellent.
and they have such dedication and such passion. So this is their words and what they learned at our institute and how that was their enough moment or what made them want to stand up for these issues.
Great.
Well, should we get to the clip?
Let's get to the clip.
Yeah, let's do it.
In my 3rd semester of college, I started taking courses on human rights. I took courses on the Holocaust, Rwanda, and human rights law. I was spending so much of my free time reading about genocide that I began to dream about it. I would dream that I was a prisoner in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. I dreamt that I would see my family's bodies in mass graves in Rwanda. And I started becoming scared to go to sleep. And then one day I realized that I had the luxury of being able to wake up from those dreams, and some people don't. And so by sheer chance, I was born somewhere that I don't have to worry about food, I don't have to worry about violence, but there's so many people in the world who do. And so my enough moment came when I realized that just by the miracle of my birth, I have a life of moderate luxury. And so I want to spend my time and my efforts fighting for those who don't, because if I happen to have been born in Congo or Rwanda or somewhere in crisis, I would hope that someone somewhere else would be fighting for me.
My enough moment happened this past school year. I was walking through the halls of my high school, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As I turned the corner, I caught sight of a young Somalian girl being harassed. My initial thought was, should I say something? I was taught from a very young age that no person should ever be harassed due to their color, moral upbringing, or sexual orientation. So I turned around and stood up for her. It's small actions like this that are taken for granted, and the youth of this generation needs to stand up for change in order to better the lives of all the future generations.
My enough moment was gradually built up as I became older and I was able to understand what injustice was, where it was happening, and how I might make a difference. I was 13 years old when I first attended my first mission trip to Denver, Colorado. This was the first memorable experience I had being exposed to the images of injustice. When I no longer felt safe, when I felt angry, and I was filled with terror and negative emotions. I witnessed the faces of rape victims, innocent families just trying to survive, and violent children as young as the age of 4 years old. I realized that knowing this, I can't just sit around watching the news day after day, reading the newspaper, to only continue to hear about these situations across the globe and in my own St. Paul community. If I was in their position, who would help me?
Last summer, I got the opportunity to intern for a nonprofit organization in St. Paul called Breaking Free. And it's an organization that helps prostituted women break free from life cycles of abuse and violence. And it's right here in St. Paul. And my boss was a very tall, powerful, strong African-American woman. And all the people who work at Breaking Free are survivors of prostitution. And she was so tough. She never let me get off on, anything that was even a little bit on the satisfactory. She pushed me to go beyond and to really perform. And I really admire her. Her name is Joy. One day I was sitting at my desk, and my desk was in the foyer, and there were couches in the front, and everything had leopard print on it. The walls are all wood, and it had kind of a musty smell that always made me want dark chocolate. So I reached into my bag and I pulled out a chocolate bar that my friend had given me over the weekend. And right at that moment that I took out this chocolate bar, Joy walked in the front door. And in her usual voice, she goes, "Avalon, what are you doing?" I said, "Hi, good morning, Miss Joy. I'm just having some chocolate. Can I offer you some?" Her immediate reaction, she looked at me and said, "You know that better not be that slave train chocolate. I don't want to ever see that in here. You don't bring that in this house." And I looked at it, and it happened to be a free trade brand, which was not anything that I had done. My friend had given me the bar. And I told her, "No, it's free trade." And I offered her a piece, and she took it and went upstairs to her office. As she went up the stairs, I was so nervous. And hearing her fiddle with her keys upstairs, getting to her office, I just thought, here's this woman who's so passionate about sex trafficking, who's putting her whole life into that, but who's living her values in every other sector of her life. Everything she does, from the way she drives her car, the car she drives, what she eats, what she's willing to buy, everything is living her values. And she really gave me the courage to stand up and decide on that day that I wasn't going to buy things that were out of step with my values in every sector of my life.
My enough moment was last year when I was at the Genocide Institute, and we watched a film called Tony that was put together by the Invisible Children organization. And during this video, I really identified with the person they followed in Uganda named Tony, and he was just like any one of my friends that I would have had if I was even like friends I had. We like the same music, we like to do the same things, and it was a moment that I finally realized like it could be me, and that if it was me, I would want someone else to do something, and I realized I could no longer be a bystander and had to be an upstander. So that was my enough moment.
And my enough moment was 2 years ago when I was touring colleges near Lake Michigan. I hadn't yet started attending summer institutes at World Without Genocide yet, but by that point in my life, I had wasted so much indignation on a world that didn't seem to want to change that I became apathetic and decided to leave it to its own problems. But I do remember being in our hotel room in Chicago and hearing the evening news. And they were running news stories that talked about how a 70-year-old woman ended up in the hospital with a fractured skull because 2 guys beat her up for not giving them her purse. Or stories about how a female doctor had been missing from her home for 2 weeks. And I remember wondering why this wasn't breaking news and how it just seemed to be the type of news that you just expected to come out of a big city. That was one of the first times I remember wondering where the root of this problem came from and wanting to understand instead of just hating the problem and pushing it away. So I want to figure out a way to redefine what we consider normal in society as far as conflict resolution and tolerance. That way we can focus more on creating equal opportunities in life for people and things like education and the bare minimums required for living, so that we don't end up having to deal with 70-year-old women being sent to the hospital with a fractured skull.
Ellen, that was such a powerful video.
Wasn't that powerful?
That was. Tell us your thoughts.
As Rachel said earlier, the most important thing is for young people to get involved, for young people to understand that the way to change the future, to envision and to reach a world without genocide, is to get engaged. Education is advocacy. We like to say knowledge is not power. Knowledge plus action equals power.
Very good.
And our goal, as you see through these 6 remarkable young people, is that they are now committed to action.
Good. Now, Rachel, what about the Summer Institute?
Well, one of the cornerstones of our Summer Institute for high school students is that we touch on issues that are international, like genocide or child soldiering or human trafficking, but that also have local implications. So next year's Summer Institute focuses on human trafficking, and you hear about that in Thailand and Cambodia, but what you don't hear about is that trafficking, Minnesota has the 13th highest proportion of trafficked people in the United States.
My
And
goodness.
so that's something that so drastically affects our community. So
Sure
it's
it
giving
does.
it's teaching the students about trafficking internationally in our communities and what they can do to stand up and take a stand against.
Okay, so if someone wants to get more information about the Summer Institute or the work you're doing, where would they go? Do you have a website?
We do. worldwithoutgenocide.org. All the information is there. We offered a Summer Institute for high school students, as we've mentioned, another one for educators, also this year on the topic of human trafficking, and many other programs and workshops.
Would you say your website again?
worldwithoutgenocide.org.
All right. Well, Ellen and Rachel, thank you so much for being with us and
Yes,
sharing this
thank
powerful
you.
message of
Yes.
genocide today. And we thank you, Candy.
Yeah. Well, when I'm flying in again, I'll
gonna grab
come on.
you again.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Hey, enough is enough.
That's right.
All
We've got to
right.
send that message.
Thank you.
And we thank you for being with us today on It's a Woman's World, and we hope to see you next time.